Good evening, everyone. If we're about to get started, if you want to take a seat. I'd like to call the meeting to order of the Putnam Republican Club. Boy, what an election. How about a hip, hip, hooray, yay! All right, we'll start off with the invocation. Cindy Wadmiller. Please stand.
Well, let us pray. Father God, we just give you praise and glory for this evening. Thank you, Lord, for the Putnam Republican Club. And Father, we just ask that we thank you for each of those who are here tonight, that as we go home tonight, see them home safely. And Father, we just ask you to bless this meeting, and please bless our speaker, Loren Spivac, and guide him in his words and all that he has to share with us. And we give you praise and glory for it all. And Lord, we thank you for President Trump and the United States of America. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Okay, the pledge, led by Buddy.
Join me, honor our country. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. I'd like to recognize elected officials. See Josh Alexander taking office this week. Leona Wilkinson. Charles Overturk. And Phil Leary. Anybody else? Did I miss anyone? Okay. Any visitors today? Is this your first time here? Please stand and tell me your name. Thank you. Any new members tonight? Stand and tell me your name. I know who your name is, but tell the group.
Tim Williams, I finally paid my dues.
Very good. Anybody else new tonight? While we're talking about elected officials, Charles, could you tell us a little bit about what's the process going to be for replacing the folks that President Trump took to be in his administration?
All right, where do I want to begin? First thing I want to do is say thank you to the voters of Putnam County. All of you. We had an 80.5% turnout. And you know, when you break a record, usually it's a point, maybe 2 points, maybe 3. We broke the record by 8 percentage points in this election. We had a little bit over 36,500 ballots, which are voters, which I believe is a record, but we're still counting a couple more to make sure. I can tell you we ran 73,000 pieces of paper through our audit because remember it was a 2-page ballot. So we were tired. That was a lot of work, 73,000 pages. President Trump, 8 years ago, had 22,000 in Putnam County. 2020, he had 25,000 votes. This year, he got 26,699 votes, which is, again, an all-time record. In the state of Florida, you all saw the results, 13 percentage points better than the other candidate. The biggest presidential race in years and years, as far as that's concerned. Florida's overall turnout was not as strong. It was about 11 million votes, and I think 4 years ago we were 12 or 13 million. So I was a little shocked about that because every county I heard was talking about their great turnout, but somewhere it changed a little bit. I will tell you, Miami-Dade County voted Republican for the first time since I think it was 1988. And Palm Beach County and even Broward County, that has 400,000 more D's than ours, was way closer. That was why she stood no chance here in the state of Florida, as far as that's concerned. But a lot of gains, especially in Dade County, to think how many people are down there. I mean, they got over 1 million voters just in the one county. And to think that they were on the R side, which was a great turnaround. 61 counties out of the 67 voted Republican. The only 6 that didn't was Broward and Palm Beach, which I said were close, Alachua, Leon, and Gadsden, and I'm forgetting one more. So Orange. Okay, thanks. So 61 out of the 67 counties, which is tremendous. As far as nationally, right now it's 312 electoral votes. I really meant this afternoon to look back and see how many years. I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is the most electoral college votes for a Republican candidate since probably George H.W. Bush in 1988. Because I know George Bush barely won both times he did, and of course President Trump, won last time, the time before. But it wasn't as many as he's got this time. So that's a plus for him. National vote-wise, right now it's come down. It was about 5 million. It's down to 3 million because California is still counting. And so is Arizona and a couple of other states. So it's going to get closer probably, but he still will have the popular vote win, which hasn't happened. I think Bush got in 2004, he did. But anyway, in the Senate, we're at 53 to 47, although they will not give up the state of Pennsylvania. They are fighting that. They are still counting in Pennsylvania. The margin is down to 26,000, and I looked on the thing a little while ago, and it said they believe there's still 52 or 53,000 votes to count. I still think McCormick is going to hold on, and it'll be 53-47, but anytime they're still counting, you just never know for sure. In the House, they just clinched, and I saw that besides 218, I think they've added one more, so it's 219 to 212 or whatever, with about 3 or 4, a couple of them in California because they're still counting. But there's one that the Republican is leading, and there's 1 or 2 that the Democrat is leading. So it's going to be pretty close to where it was before as we came in. Some statistics here in Florida that I just thought were interesting. 63% of the white voters voted for Trump. 23% of the African Americans voted for Trump. And 55% of the Latinos/Hispanics voted for Trump. Unbelievable gains. With the African American, when you've been down at 6 or 7 or 8%, and you got 23%, that's game changing. And Hispanics, over half their vote, And again, that's why you saw South Florida the way it was in Dade County and all, because those people wanted him to be there. So anyway, all right, the last thing they wanted me to mention was U.S. House, our House seat here, District 6. Mike Waltz won 2-1 in his re-election the other night. Most of you know, of course, that he has now been named as President Trump's National Security Advisor, so that means he has to leave the House. So the way that is, the governor does not have a right to appoint anything but the U.S. Senator spot. They cannot appoint congressional members of either the state House or state Senate or congressional. So that means we will have an election at some point here in the next couple of months. I know that Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, is really scared because he's lost 2 or 3 members of the House. And I just told you that the margin is really close. So of course he's hoping that those elections can be held really quick. The way it will be done, there will be a qualifying period. Both parties and anybody else independent-wise has a right to qualify. It is usually a shortened period of just 2 or 3 days. Instead of doing petitions, they usually just write a check for their qualifying, and they all will qualify in Tallahassee. So we'll have a qualifying period. And then if there's candidates in both parties, we will have primaries. And then again, once the winners are chosen in the primaries, then that's who will face off each other in the general. I'm sort of hoping we here in Putnam have a municipal election in March, and Flagler has 3 on that same day. So we have sent an appeal into the state saying, if you're going to pick dates, would you please maybe pick March 4th, and either as the primary or maybe as the general election, just so that way it helps us out a little bit. So that'll be the process. As far as that, you all saw that Gates was nominated for Attorney General. That's in the Panhandle, but that'll be another special election for those people up there. So every time you move somebody up, there's openings. The big opening that will be decided by Governor DeSantis is the U.S. Senate seat. I'm hearing several names. As I walked in a few minutes ago, I heard the name of Lara Trump. But I've also heard a couple other names, including DeSantis himself, and he has the right to name himself as a senator if he so chooses. So that one's going to be interesting to see which way he goes with that, whether he goes with one of the others or he decides he wants it himself. We all know that he is going to run again in 4 years for president. So he's got to decide, is it better to serve out my 2 years and then not be in office running for president, or is it better if I'm a senator, and then he'd have to run in 26, but in all probability he would win that. So he's going to have to make that decision, or somebody is, as far as that's concerned. So a lot of things went well for us that night. I stayed up till about 3:15, already dead tired from an election that started at 4:30 the morning before. But I wanted to see his speech and to make sure that what I saw 4 years ago didn't happen again, where I went to bed and somebody was winning, and then when I woke up, they weren't. So anyway, so that's sort of where we are as far as that's concerned. I don't know if anybody's got a question or if I touched on anything, but don't want to take up too much time. So anybody? Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious, how did you know the race of the voters? How was that figured, the percentages that we gave? How do they know?
Just we don't know how they voted, but we do know the percentage of, and they do it through exit polling. And oh, by the way, for the first time in history that I know of, Putnam County had exit pollers in our Interlaken precinct out there. The guy was real nice. He was from Jacksonville. He stayed there all day. You as a voter do not have to talk to him if you don't want to. And oh, by the way, he can only approach you after you've come out. That's why they call it exit polling. But there are people that will say, I voted for President Trump. I'm such and such color or race, stuff like that and all. So that's how they sort of determined that his percentage went up that much. But they had them all over the state too, in different precincts. All right. Okay, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Okay, 3 days ago was Veterans Day. We would like to pay tribute to our veterans. Would anybody who is a veteran or was a veteran, would you please stand? And remain standing, please. Anyone who is a spouse or has been a spouse of a veteran, would you please stand? Thank you. Let's take a moment of silence to pay tribute. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thanks for all the service that you gave to our nation. Thank you, thank you. Okay, please be seated. All right, every year we have to elect new officers. So it's that time. The term of the office is 1 year. It goes from January 1st of 2025 to December 31st, 2025. That'll be what this election is for. And all acting full club members are eligible to vote or run. Any questions? Okay, the first office for the club is for president. Do I hear a nomination for office of president?
Yes, sir. I would like to nominate Dr. Williams for president.
You're nominating? Okay. We have a nomination. Do we have a second?
Second.
Who's seconding? Candy Enzer has seconded. Is there another nomination?
David, who was the first one? I couldn't hear.
Rhonda Williams was nominated by Bobby Jackson and seconded by Candy Enzer. Okay. Hearing no other nominations and without objections, I declare Rhonda Williams elected president by acclamation. The next office is vice president. Do I hear a nomination for office of vice president? No.
I nominate Buddy Goddard for vice president.
Buddy Goddard nominated for vice president. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Ann Miller has seconded the nomination. Are there any other nominations for vice president? Hearing no other nominations and without objections, I declare Buddy Goddard elected by acclamation. Elected vice president by acclamation. Okay, next office is treasurer. Do I hear a nomination for the office of treasurer? Barbara Altman is nominated by Ann Miller. Is there a second? Okay, we have a second for Barb Altman.
Second.
Ray?
Seconded.
Ray Simmons seconded it.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other nominations for treasurer? Hearing no other nominations and without objections, I declare Barb Altman elected treasurer by acclamation. The next office is for club treasurer. Do I hear a nomination for office? I'm secretary, I'm sorry. Do I hear a nomination for secretary? Tim. Savannah Williams is nominated for secretary by Tim Williams. Is there a second?
I'll say.
The other Tim Williams. All right, who do we have a second? Tim? Okay, we have a second. Are there any other nominations for secretary?
Ann, don't you want it back?
Pardon?
I was asking Ann if she wanted that job back.
Hearing no other nominations and without objections, I declare Savannah Williams elected secretary by acclamation. Would the four officers come up to the podium, please? The newly elected ones.
Let's get over to this side. Oh, this side? You also have the microphone.
Yeah.
Try to have a picture.
Like a motley crew right there with everything going.
That make me look good.
Motley crew.
We want to thank all of you guys for your love and support this year. It's been a tough year for all of us. I think next year is going to be a fabulous year now that we have less stress in our lives on a national level. Thank the Lord. And now that we don't have any big elections other than the one special election, I think we're going to have an easy year ahead so we can make a lot of plans for the next presidential election. So thank you so much, guys, and we will see you in the future.
Okay, Yelmer, could you come up and introduce our speaker?
Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for coming. I just want to say that I've been honored and proud to have served as your vice president for 3 years. And I fully endorse Buddy Goddard, that's for sure. And if you don't mind, does anyone want to hear a joke? Okay. A politician dies and a spirit appears. You have a choice between heaven and hell. Oh, okay. But first, you must experience it. So, first you're going to see heaven. So they go and they take a look at heaven. It is beautiful. A garden, trees, people, everybody's happy. He goes, okay, now you get to see hell. Well, he goes and he looks, and it's like heaven on steroids. It's like garden, trees, people happy, they're laughing, they're having a great time. And he says, look, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I'll take hell. The spirit says, turn around. And when he turns around, The whole place is on fire. The trees, the garden, the people, they're screaming, they're in agony. He turns to the Spirit and he says, "What happened? It looked like such a great place." The Spirit says, "Oh, that was the campaign. This is what you voted for." And with that, like that? Okay, with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker for the evening, Loren Spivac. I hope I said it right. Is it Spivac?
Well, thank you guys for having me. I speak to Republican groups all over the country on a wide variety of topics, more or less related to free market economics. And I'll start off by saying I think probably a lot of you woke up on Wednesday morning and said, "Wow, the battle is over." But that has not been my experience. Maybe your experience is that after the election, the battle is over. It's my experience that the battle is just beginning when the election is over. Most of you look old enough to remember 2016. You can remember 2016. And if I remember correctly, Trump won and the Republicans controlled the Senate and the House. And the Democrats said, "Well, you guys won fair and square, so we'll just be quiet for the next 4 years." Is that what they did? I don't think so. In fact, if anything, I think you tend to hear very little from the left during the election because nobody likes what they have to say. And the Democrats run on secure borders and low crime and low inflation, and all of this stuff pops out after the election. So I wanted to talk to you guys specifically about the left in the United States today, and questions that you probably already have asked yourself, like, who are these people? What is this actually all about? And what does it mean for us? So that's what I was going to talk about. I was going to talk a little bit about the left, because they're not going anywhere, at least for a while. And the first and most logical question one would probably start with, if you were trying to understand the left, is you would say, what are their principles? Right? Because they don't talk about principles a lot. We tend to get a whole flood of policy proposals that the federal government needs to provide free health care, apparently for the entire population of planet Earth, that we need to have some kind of a genocide against flatulating cows, and on it goes. But what are their principles? It's an important question. It's also probably the easiest question of the evening because there aren't any. The first thing you need to understand if you want to understand the left is they don't have principles. Not at all. And that's not a punchline. I'm trying to make a very precise point. Let's take a moment and make sure we understand what the word principle means. A principle is not the same thing as a belief. There's an old joke, everybody has to believe in something. I believe I'll have another beer. And that might be what you believe, but it's not a principle. You know what makes something a principle? Is that it applies to everybody all the time. If it doesn't apply to everybody all the time, it may be what you fancy at the moment, but it's not a principle. Would you like an example? The 10 Commandments are principles. You know why? They apply to everybody all the time. They're thousands of years old, and yet they're as relevant today as they ever were. I don't know anybody who's exempt, and neither do you. They're principles. The left does not have principles. So if you are, as I am, I guess I'm a student of the left, you find interesting stuff like this. The modern left, the university left is probably the better term, got its start on the college campuses in the 60s, originally as a free speech movement. That is to say, the original incarnation of the hard left on the college campuses called itself a free speech movement, which I think is fascinating because those same people grew up and now they run the universities, and the universities are the least free speechy place in the entire country. Well, which is it? Are they for free speech or are they against free speech? And to ask the question is to demonstrate that you still don't understand the left. They're for free speech when it's their speech, and they're against free speech when it's anybody else's speech, because speech was never a principle, it was a tactic. You know what a tactic is, right? It's something you use to achieve a particular objective, and you throw it out the window as soon as you're done with it. They have lots of tactics. They just don't have principles. You know what the latest hot trend in American college campuses is? It's all the rage. Segregated dormitories for black kids. In a survey last year, 42% of American universities today boast of racially segregated dormitories. 22% have racially segregated graduation ceremonies. And a whole flood of questions floods into my head like, didn't we go through this before? It's like we've been here before. It was a colossally bad idea, and I distinctly remember the left being against segregation. But they weren't. They were against other people's segregation. When they do it, now it's a good thing, which is one of the signs that you don't have any principles. People with principles try to figure out what's the right thing to do and do it. People without principles assume that things become right by virtue of the fact that they are doing it. Another sign that you don't have any principles is that you tend to throw your own friends under the bus a lot, because that's what people without principles do. And I want to give you a couple examples of this, because I think it really helps to expand our understanding of this topic. And the first example takes us to the nation of Sweden. Sweden has a well-deserved reputation for being the feminist capital of the world. They are so feminist in Sweden, you can hardly believe it. If you have a business in Sweden, not only do half your employees have to be women, half your board has to be women. If you form a government in Sweden, by law, half the government has to be women. It doesn't matter who the people voted for. Nobody cares about that. What matters is that half of everything's got to be women, because Sweden is the feminist capital of the world. And then, just recently, a really funny thing has happened. Sweden has become one of the rape capitals of the world. They have the highest rate of forcible rape on the entire continent of Europe, and it's even worse than that sounds. They're competing with, I believe, Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Lesotho. How did that happen? How do you go from being the feminist capital to the rape capital in like the blink of an eye? And the answer is they invited in hundreds and hundreds of thousands of migrants, mostly from the Middle East, who are perpetrating all of these crimes. So this is not my idle speculation. Recently, the Swedish government commissioned a study to figure out what was going on here, and I, for one, have not seen a statistic this lopsided, I think, in my entire life. They concluded that 95% of the perpetrators were immigrants. Only 5% were native Swedes, and in fairness, when that report came out, the Swedish government took immediate action. They immediately passed a law making it illegal to do any more studies of who's getting convicted of rape. Who says government can't solve problems? We won't see any more reports like that, because now the reports are illegal. But the question that I hope you're asking yourself is, what about the women? Who are the victims? Doesn't the feminist capital of the world care about the women who are the victims? And the answer is, they used to care about the women. They like the immigrants better. They have moved on. The best way to think about this is that the women were their old crush. The immigrants are their new crush. They have moved on. Now, I want to give you a second example, which is different, but I think you'll see the parallel. And this is something that's happening in the United States right now. And I know you know the story as well as I do. This is the whole issue of women's sports. And someone's going to write a big comprehensive book about this, because if you think about it globally, it's really fascinating. Up until very, very recently in the history of the world, there was no such thing as women's sports. Women's sports is a very modern idea. The ancient Greeks had the Olympics 3,000 years ago. It was exclusively male. Now, the ancient Greek historians tell us that 3,000 years ago, a woman disguised herself as a man, snuck into the Olympics, and apparently won something. And when they found out, they changed the rules to require that going forward, all athletes would have to compete naked to make sure that it would never happen again. Which shows us a couple things, including that the ancient Greeks seem to have had a better grasp on fundamental human biology than a lot of American university professors today. And for the next 3,000 years, there were no women's sports. Not till the 20th century, and slowly at first, and it kind of started picking up steam, and I think it's a good thing. It's healthy, it's competitive, different sports for different people. What could go wrong? Well, apparently what could go wrong is the idea that men who claim to be women and aren't get to compete in the sports on the same terms as the women, which is absurd because men and women are different. Something that everybody knew up until about 10 minutes ago. Women's hips are designed to give birth to babies, which, let me say, is a neat trick that I can't do. Men's hips run faster. Nothing wrong with it, just the way God made us, it's fine. Nothing to complain about. I always say that if women could run faster than men, I might have never gotten married. So there we go. You know, I made that joke last year in Oklahoma, and somebody said, "Oh, you would have gotten married, you just wouldn't have 6 kids." So it's all how you look at it. But the point is that men and women are different, and if you put the men into the women's sports, they will inevitably drive the women out of their own sports. How does the left feel about women being driven out of their own sports they used to champion? And the answer is, it's just like Sweden. They used to care about the women. They like the transgender people better. They have moved on. Old crush, new crush. The left is like the worst spouse ever. The minute somebody new comes along, you're like, bye-bye, honey, it's been great, but I found someone new. I'm heading on down the line. It is the very essence of who they are. I will tell you what no one else will tell you, and that is that the left will throw the Islamic immigrants and the transgender people under the bus also. As soon as they find somebody new they like better, and I guarantee they will, because it's the very essence of who they are. And at this point, I'm probably leaving you with something of a mystery. You're probably saying to yourself, well, he's telling us there's this big, scary, dangerous force in our country, and indeed the entire Western world. And then he's telling us that they don't believe in anything at all, which is what I'm telling you. And you're probably saying, wait a second, if this isn't about anything at all, what are we even talking about? What is this thing that's not about anything? And the answer is, it's a cult of power. They want power. They want power over you. And they don't particularly care how they get it. And this is the hardest thing for conservatives to understand, because conservatives don't think this way, but they don't particularly care what they do with you once they have the power over you. That is a detail to be worked out later. Every time I tell this to a room full of conservatives, someone always says to me, yeah, but what do they want the power for? They don't know what they want the power for. They just want the power. They have no idea what challenges you will face in your life going forward, but they are certain that they will have the correct answer for your challenges, and you will have the incorrect answer for your challenges. And we see this exact phenomenon if we look at left-wing governments in power historically. Stalin, for example, or Mao, or Castro, or Newsom. Pick your left-wing dictator, they're pretty interchangeable. I'll go with Stalin. Stalin would wake up one morning and he would say, you know, I had all the peasants over here working on this project, but you know what? I changed my mind. I've been thinking about this, and this project over here is a better project. Tell the peasants to stop working on this one and come over here and work on this project instead. So, the peasants are going to move over, because if they don't do what they're told, they'll be shot and thrown in a ditch with the other peasants who didn't do what they were told. So they're going to come. And maybe the next morning, Stalin wakes up and says, oh my goodness, I thought of something even better. Forget both of those. Come over here, work on this project. You understand? That's a detail. What matters to Stalin is that he has absolute control over everybody's life, and nobody has any control whatsoever over their own life. That is the goal. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I will challenge anyone to tell me any detail of your life so small, so remote, that the left wouldn't try to control it if they could. Shall we start with your light bulbs? How about what you eat? Are you allowed to cook what you eat on a gas stove? What car you drive? Are you allowed to drive a car at all? How you raise your kids? Are you allowed to have kids at all? What gets injected into your arm? Tell me the detail of your life the left wouldn't control if they could. I bet you can't come up with anything. And usually someone will say to me, you know, there's socialism. They really like socialism. Surely there must be some kind of a principle behind socialism, isn't there? And this is worth a minute, because an alarming number of our fellow citizens think that socialism is just a wonderful idea. It actually means a lot less than what most people think it means. Socialism is a surprisingly simple concept that really has only two moving parts. There are two ingredients to socialism. The first one is that somebody out there has a vision about your life, which, by the way, is the second big difference between the way conservatives think and the way leftists think. Most conservatives will tend to daydream about what they would like their own life to be like. Leftists daydream about what they would like your life to be like. And they're leftists daydreaming about you right now as you sit here, and we're halfway to socialism already, because that's the first half. The second half is that they believe that they're entitled to use force, the force of the state, to force their vision on people who do not share their vision. And that's the other half. And you could say to me, well, what entitles them to do that? Well, in the left-wing worldview, if you have the vision, if you are the visionary, that inherently entitles you to use force on the non-visionaries. I wish it were more complicated, I really do, but it's not. The reason that Bernie Sanders is a socialist is he has a vision of what he would like your life to be like, and if he has the force of the state behind him, he will shove that vision down your throat. You know who else was a socialist? Hitler was a socialist. He was the head of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, which sounds pretty socialist, but let's take a closer look. Did Hitler have a vision of what everybody else's life ought to be like? Why, yes, he did. Okay, did he believe that he was entitled to use force to force the vision on people who did not share the vision? Well, yes again, and that's it, we're out of test. He absolutely was a socialist, and I want to be careful here. I'm not saying that Bernie Sanders and Hitler have the same vision. I'm sure they don't. Sanders is Jewish. I'm sure he doesn't share Hitler's racial vision. That's not my point. My point is not that they have the same vision, but they both have a vision. In both cases, their vision is about other people's lives, and they both believe they're entitled to use force to force their vision on people who do not share their vision. In those three areas, they're absolutely on the same page. And if Bernie Sanders were here with us tonight in this very room with us, what would he say about what I just told you? Because I know exactly what he'd say. He would say Hitler's vision was bad, and my vision is good. Promise he'd say that, and that's fair enough. But what if Hitler were joining us this evening? Well, what would he say? He would say Bernie Sanders' vision is bad and my vision's good, so there. And that's kind of a microcosm of our future under the socialists. When the socialists win, they will immediately start fighting with each other. They always do, because they don't actually agree on that much, except they all really like power. And then we and our children and our children's children will get to spend the rest of eternity living at the whim of whichever socialist ends up on top of the socialist big pile and wins the right to impose their will downward on everybody below. So if you're with me this far, you understand that this battle we're in, and we are in a battle, and the battle continues, is not between our principles and their principles, because it can't be, because they don't have any principles. We're in a battle over whether we want to live in a country that's based on principles or a country with no principles at all. You know what happens when your country has no principles at all? It's ruled by force. That's the only thing left if you don't have principles. It's a matter of who's got the biggest stick to beat everybody else down with. As it happens, our founding fathers were big believers in principles. Principles that apply to everybody all the time. I've already mentioned that we find a lot of these principles in the Bible. You know where we also find a lot of the principles? The Constitution. Just chock full of principles that apply to everybody all the time, which is why the left hates both the Bible and the Constitution, because it's the exact opposite of their agenda. Although they will quote individual lines out of either the Bible or the Constitution to win the argument they're in at the moment, while ignoring the rest of the document. Why do you think they will do that? It's because they don't have any principles. How are we doing for time? We're good for me to go in the second half? Okay. What I want to do in part two is talk a little bit about some of the specific principles that are at stake in our country right now. And obviously this is a good opportunity for us to try to reinforce those with the political power that we've gained in the election, but it's very important that we keep our eyes on what they are. And we could come up with 100, but time is limited. I was going to mention 3. The first one is freedom of speech. Freedom of speech has never been so endangered in the United States as it is right now. And the warning signs are everywhere. Both the New York Times and the Washington Post have written multiple editorials to the effect that freedom of speech has got to go. According to the editorial board of the New York Times, freedom of speech is incompatible with democracy. To save democracy, says the New York Times, we have to end freedom of speech in the United States. I think future historians will marvel that the battle against freedom of speech was led by the newspapers. But we live in ironic times. There'll be more ironies before we're done. Another warning sign is that when I was a kid, there were lots of countries that had freedom of speech. Countries like us, Western, European, English-speaking, in many cases, kinds of countries like Canada and Australia, New Zealand, and England, and Ireland, and France, and Belgium, and Norway, and Holland, and Denmark, and Luxembourg, and they all used to have freedom of speech. Today, none of them do. Freedom of speech is dead in every major country on earth except the United States. Did you know that? And I'm not talking about Cuba and Iran. I'm talking about our NATO allies, the countries that are our best friends in the world. There are 31 countries in NATO besides the United States. How many of them do you think have freedom of speech today? None. Not one of our NATO allies has freedom of speech. They all used to, but not anymore. You might want to ask yourself, how did freedom of speech end in all these other countries that are so similar to us? Because it's probably how it's going to end here, don't you think? And the answer is that when the left successfully came to end freedom of speech amongst our NATO allies, they said, we're not going to get rid of nice, happy speech. You can talk about how nice the weather is, that's fine. We're just going to get rid of hate. You don't want hate, do you? You don't look like a hateful person to me. You're not going to miss that old hate, are you? Well, let me tell you what that means in real life. What do you think is the biggest political issue in Europe today? And I mean the whole continent of Europe, from the Urals to the Atlantic. And I don't mean like today. I mean for the last 15 years and the next 15 years. I mean this entire generation on the entire continent of Europe. What do you think is the biggest political issue? It's not even close. It's immigration. The continent of Europe has been flooded with millions upon millions upon millions of immigrants. I used to say almost as many as crossed our border last night. But I think what I've heard on the news is that they're starting to slow down already. So that's a good sign to begin with. But Europe is absolutely flooded with these immigrants. And if you're in favor of the immigration, that's okay. You can talk about that all you want, no problem. If, on the other hand, you're opposed to the immigration, or you think maybe we ought to slow it down a notch, maybe we ought to have a discussion about what our national priorities ought to be, well, guess what? That's hate speech. It's illegal. They'll lock you up. In London, England, right now, they're having the worst crime wave in the history of London, and the city is 1,000 years old. The crime wave is caused by the immigrants, and everybody knows it. But you can't say it, or they'll arrest you. They've taken 1,000 police officers off the streets of London and put them behind computers so they can watch what people are writing on Facebook and Twitter and other social media accounts and arrest them if they express the wrong opinion. They're arresting 12 people a day in the UK for expressing the wrong opinion online. I should mention they invented free speech. Glorious Revolution, 1688, 100 years before our Constitution, the British had freedom of speech. But it's dead as a doornail there. The only question is how much longer does it last here? And this is just an anecdote, just one story I saw, was a 68-year-old widow who wrote on her Facebook page, she said, I'm worried that all of this immigration is going to lower the average IQ in Britain. Well, she's been arrested and is looking to spend the next 2 years in His Majesty's prison for the crime of expressing that opinion. And before someone asks me whether she might have been correct, it doesn't matter. The courts in Europe have all ruled that truth is not a defense. You can prove that what you said was 100% scientifically accurate beyond a doubt. The world doesn't matter. That truth is illegal. That is a truth crime. If truth offends the wrong people, truth is illegal. In Canada, if a man comes up to you in a dress and he says, I'm a woman, and you say, no, you're a man in a dress, 2 years in prison. That's a crime in Canada. You are required by law to agree with them. You don't agree with them, I hope you like orange, because that's the color you're going to be wearing for the next 2 years. And by the way, all of these countries I'm mentioning are tightening their anti-speech laws. The new British Labour government, which just got elected, is trying to make the speech codes far more draconian than they were. Canada has new legislation that's designed to allow for up to life in prison for nothing more than expressing the wrong opinion. Okay? You don't have to harm a hair on anybody's head. Ireland too. Okay? All of the English-speaking countries are making their speech codes tougher. So that was the first example I was going to give you. The second one is about the way our judicial system works. And I'll cut right to the chase on this. The left does not believe in impartial justice. They do not. They believe that what happens to you should not be based on what crime you committed. It should be based on what team you're on. And they deeply believe this. If you are part of an historic movement for social justice, and you have to burn down a few police stations and courthouses and cities along the way, well, we'll let that slide because what you're doing is so historic. If, on the other hand, you wander around the Capitol building for half an hour with the police opening the doors for you as you go, but you did it for Trump, you need to be locked up and have the key thrown away. That's not historic. You go to prison. And again, they are deeply committed to this. And I told you the threat to freedom of speech is at the door. This one's past the door. This one's arrived. This is justice in America today. Look at the way the Justice Department has been treating Trump versus how they treated Hillary or how they treated Biden on the same charges. Look at how BLM protesters are treated versus the way January 6th protesters are treated. You know, it's very nice that Trump seems to have beaten the charges by getting elected president, but that is not a realistic option open to most of us, I'm just going to say. And I hate to beat you over the head with too many Nazi stories in one evening, but occasionally they're very relevant, so here goes. In the 1920s in Germany, the era that's referred to usually as the Weimar Republic years, between the wars, there was a great deal of politically motivated violence going on in Germany, mostly between the Nazis and the communists, who were both trying to take over the country, and they were literally battling each other in the streets of Germany. There were loads of politically motivated homicides and assaults and arsons and kidnappings and other such serious crimes. And the Weimar government, which was failing, we know they weren't going to survive, they prosecuted when they could. If they could get a case together, they would prosecute. So by the time Hitler came to power in 1933, there were a whole bunch of Nazis and a whole bunch of communists locked up in German prisons for crimes committed against the other side. What do you think Hitler did when he came to power? This is not a toughie. He freed all the Nazis and executed all the communists, because of course he did. But here's the question. What if the communists had come to power in 1933? They were both trying to. It could have been the communists who came to power in 1933. What would they have done? They would have freed the communists and executed the Nazis, because the Nazis and the communists may hate each other, and they do. They are just two different subspecies of socialism. They're the Coke and the Pepsi of socialism. And ironically, what they agree on is that what happens to you should not be about the crime. It should be about what side you're on. And that's exactly what the modern American left believes. And the final example I was going to give of a principle is capitalism itself. One of the things that often drives me up the wall, particularly about a lot of young people today, is they seem to think that there's 197 economic systems to choose from. I say, what economic system would you like to have? And they say, well, let's look at the menu. Let's see what we got here. Number 42 looks good. That's my first choice. If that one doesn't work out, 113. That's my second choice. Well, that's nonsense. There aren't 197 economic systems to choose from. How many economic systems do you think there are in the entire universe of possible economic systems? There are two. Sorry, there's two economic systems out there. The first one's called capitalism. You know how that works? You leave people alone. It changes all the time. But if you're leaving people alone, you got capitalism, which is not to say that capitalism does not have any rules. It does have rules, but the rules are very clear and very simple, and most of all, the rules of capitalism are principled. The same rules apply to everybody all the time. You want to know what they are? You can't steal stuff. You can't hurt people. You can't threaten to hurt people. You can't lie to people about what you're selling them. You can't say our burgers are 100% pure beef and they're actually made of ground-up alley cats or something, okay? You can't do that. Okay? Same rules apply to everything. They apply to the rich people, the poor people, everybody in between. Same rules. The results are different because people are different, but it's the same rules for everyone. Socialism has no such fixed rules because the socialists are trying to maneuver you into what they think is the right outcome for you. They will change the rules on you 100 times before breakfast every morning, trying to manipulate you into where they want you to be. And there's more. The socialists claim to be egalitarian, that all they want is equality. But if you understand that socialism is somebody with a vision who wishes to impose his vision on everybody else, well, everybody can't do that at the same time. That doesn't make any sense. If we become a socialist country, do you think that you will be able to impose your vision on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Who do you think you are? You're not the visionary, she's the visionary. She's got the vision, she does the imposing. You are here to be imposed upon, and you better get that through your head if you're going to make it in our new socialist country. Okay? So the first rule of socialism is you got to figure out who the imposers are and who the imposees are. And then also, the socialists promise everything: free health care, free housing, free everything. And they deliver nothing. They deliver Venezuela is what they deliver. Capitalism, on the other hand, promises nothing. There's no promises in capitalism. You can starve to death under capitalism. You know what? If you don't work, you don't eat. Not only is that in the Bible, it's also readily apparent in the world around us. If you were shipwrecked all by yourself on a desert island like Robinson Crusoe, you want to know something? If you don't work, you don't eat. What are you going to do, march up and down the beach protesting for free food? You will starve to death. But having promised nothing, capitalism has given us the greatest standard of living in the history of the world. The average American today is something like 2,500 times wealthier than the average American at the time of George Washington. It's breathtaking. There hasn't been an increase in prosperity like that in the history of the universe. How did we do it? A couple hundred years of leaving people alone. Almost hard to believe, except you and I are living proof of exactly that. So there's my economic thoughts. I'm going to take my last 2 minutes here and tell you really quickly about the books I write. Because years ago, my friends said you should write a book. And I did, and it was the wrong book. Everyone thought I was going to write a 500-page tome about economics. But I had an epiphany that people don't read 500-page tomes about economics. If you write something fun and funny and accessible, you'll reach far more people. So my first book is called The New Democrat. It's a parody history of the Obama years done as the Cat in the Hat. Has everyone read The Cat in the Hat? It's like Cat shows up uninvited at this middle-class American home. What's he do when he gets inside? He wrecks the place. It was kind of like Obama is what I was thinking. And then he's got these two friends, Thing 1 and Thing 2, who wrecked the place even worse, and they became Pelosi and Reed. And I realized I was writing the first history of the Obama years, all done just like the Cat in the Hat. I got my first book review. Salon.com said that this was the most twisted piece of conservative propaganda print matter out there. And I was touched. That's on the cover now. And I was moved to write my second book. Who's read The Lorax by Dr. Seuss? It was a movie a couple years ago. Dr. Seuss was a huge leftist, lifelong member of the American Socialist Party. Of course he was. And The Lorax was his environmentalist book. It's about an evil capitalist called the Onceler who cuts down trees and makes consumer goods. And we are taught that that is bad, bad, bad. He drives the trees to extinction. He wipes them out until they're extinct. There's no more trees, and his factory promptly goes out of business because there's no more trees. And I read this to my kids. I said, does that make sense to you? Do you think that capitalists destroy species that their business depends on? Do you think that Colonel Sanders is going to drive the chicken to extinction? Can I see hands on this? Who's worried that Colonel Sanders is going to throw every last chicken into the fryer and then they'll be extinct and we'll never see another chicken again? I think it's exactly the opposite. I think Colonel Sanders cares more about the survival of the chicken species than anybody on the planet, including the chickens. He's got billions wrapped up in this. There are going to be more chickens as long as Colonel Sanders has anything to say about it. And I'll tell you something else. There are more chickens alive in the world today than ever before in history. Do you know why? It's because we like to eat them. That's why. The greatest thing that ever happens to a species is that human beings like to eat you. This is like winning the species lottery. So this was a book that very much needed to be parodied. Mine is called The Gorax because it stars Al Gore as the Lorax character. And it's about how America used to be free and prosperous, and then the environmentalist wackos started driving everybody out of business. The Wizard of Iz is obviously a parody of The Wizard of Oz. My first thought was that Bill Clinton made a really great wizard. Because you recall, the original wizard is a fake. He's a charlatan. It's all smoke and mirrors. I thought Clinton did perfectly. When they first meet him in my book, they say, "Are you the Wizard of Iz?" And he says, "It all depends on your definition of Iz." Hillary is the Wicked Witch. Oh, do you remember the Cowardly Lion? I replaced him with a cowardly rhino. Ooh. Who suspects that the Democrats are wrong, but he's too scared to do anything about it. He's looking for the courage to do something useful when he gets to Washington. And it's a good story. It starts when Dorothy's house lands on Obama, and she finds herself in the land of the free lunchkins who've been living off the government for so long they've forgotten how to take care of themselves. To think that I saw it on CNN Live is about the media and Trump. It's the Trump story with a focus on the pathological dishonesty of our media. Motley Click is an interesting book. I wanted to do something about the whole critical race theory, identity politics world that we live in. The background story is Moby Dick, right? It's Motley Click. It's a seafaring book. It's about a ship full of social justice warriors. And they hire for diversity, so they very carefully have selected a crew with one of everybody. There's a black guy, Jewish guy, Muslim, Asian, gay, Mexican woman, transgender, Indian, lesbian. And they're all out hunting for the great white racist. But they end up catching each other. They keep finding these flaws in each other's wokeness. Turns out none of them are quite so woke as they made out to be. It's a very ironic story about how the anti-racists are like the most racist people you're ever going to meet. The Fisherman's Husband is a parody of the LGBTQIA plus minus divided by sign movement based on The Fisherman's Wife, which is a classic fairy tale about pushing things too far. And it's my story about how the gay rights movement has moved from reasonable to insanity over the course of 50 years. That it started out 50 years ago with people who were gay who said we would like to not get beaten up because we're gay, which is awfully reasonable. And then it moved into, well, we need civil unions. And then civil unions very quickly were no good because we need marriage equality, because no man and a woman, two men, same thing, marriage equality. And then it moved into your kids need to be taught this in kindergarten. And every movie out of Hollywood needs to have a gay subplot. And if your kid's third grade teacher decides he was born in the wrong body, he's off to the operating room. And if you have a problem with that, you're just a bad parent. This has gone from reasonable to insanity over 50 years. And that's what my book, The Fisherman's Husband, is about, which takes us to my latest, Camelot, with a K, is the story of the Biden administration done as the King Arthur legend, with Biden as a kind of a senile King Arthur. It's also my first musical. In this one, the various characters break into song throughout. So, for example, Nancy Pelosi sings a song I wrote called Speaker of the House, which is to the tune of Master of the House from Les Mis. This is where half the room says, "What's Les Mis?" And the person next to you hopefully can help with that. Hunter Biden sings If Daddy Were a Big Shot, which is to the tune of If I Were a Rich Man from Fiddler on the Roof. And Dr. Fauci sings I Am the Very Model of a Scientific Scientist, which is to the tune of I Am the Very Model of a Modern Major General from Gilbert and Sullivan. That's for those of you who didn't think Les Mis was obscure enough. And several other original songs. They are fun, unique gifts for conservative people, if you happen to know any. And if the election was like 10 days ago, that means 40 days from now is Christmas. And if you think about the people you buy gifts for anyhow, somebody on your list would like them. And they don't have them because they're not in stores, they're not online. If they haven't met me, they haven't seen the book. So it's a truly unique Christmas gift. And they'll like it, and you get to check somebody off your list. And it helps me do what I do, which is to travel the country and share these thoughts with nice folks like yourself. So I look at that as kind of a win-win-win. I can do cash, credit cards, checks, I can do practically everything. My table is like right behind the black curtain here on the blue table by the wall behind us. If you'd like to come by and check them out, I'd be happy to show them to you. And thank you guys so much for your time. And we're there. Do you want me to take questions or sit down and be quiet, or do you want me to?
Real quick. As soon as we got here tonight, I went by Loren's table, started looking at the books, and started cracking up. And I said, I want a whole set. So I'm not breaking it up on a whole set, but I got a whole set plus one. But what got me was on the front of the Vorax, there's a little sign here that says this book is made from a 500-year-old tree cut from an old growth forest, and it landed on a squirrel. So I said, I've got to buy a book. Great job tonight. Thank you.
I try to do something amusing on the cover. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Yomar.
All righty. I'm going to tell you who's coming up next year, and I only know two people. One is Julianne Young. She comes in January every year, and she gives us the lowdown on the county. And of course, she talks so fast that doesn't take too long. And then the next month, which is February, we're going to have Sharon Farron. And she's going to be talking about transgenderism. She's anti-transgenderism, and she's been involved in this community, and she'll kind of shock you because she knows what's going on in our schools. If you think it's not happening, it is. So she'll be up in February. After that, buddy, it's on you. No, I'll help him.
Thank you, Alma. Okay, coming up next, every year in December, there's a holiday called Christmas. And we try to have a little celebration with our party, with our club. And so we're going to talk about it right now. If you'd come up. And
Wait for that.
tell us about it, tell what's going on. It's going to be a little different this year, I think.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. We're going to tone it down this year to having our Christmas party. It's going to be a redneck Juliet gent. Throw down your jeans and your boots and your cowgirl hats and bling. If you want to bling it, baby. We'll bring it. So it's going to be the 12th of December at the Women's Club. It's $35 a person. We're not rich around here, so you're gonna get up. Well, you're gonna save money by coming because we're gonna have barbecue. We're doing barbecue, not no fancy stuff. So there will be music, and basically we just want to get out there and have a good time, celebrate for what the year has ended and brought us, and for the future down the street. And we hope and pray that we're going to have a fantastic year coming up. Got all new officers and everything, so no pun against the old officers. Y'all done a fantastic job. All of you. So, as a body, and if y'all can, please spread the word. We need RSVPs. I know we discussed the 1st of December, didn't we, Rhonda? So we need to stretch that maybe a week out from there so that RSVPs and invitations could be sent out, I assume. Has that been done? The invitations? It's in the newsletter? Okay, make sure y'all read your newsletter and get back with us, so we'll extend that time. I don't know if they put a time frame on that. Well, check your calendar now so I can give them a date. What's the week after the 1st? About the 7th, 8th? 9th, no later than the 9th. Would that be a good?
Sounds good.
Okay, so we need an RSVP from y'all by the 9th of December so that we'll know how many people we're going to have there and how much food we need to order. Okay? Probably not. We might do a 50-50, you know. Like I said, we're trying to keep it at a low budget, redneck cost. So, all right, thank y'all. What's your question, Miss Candy?
Adult beverages?
BYOB if you wanna. Will that work, Rhonda? Bring your own stuff, put it at your table. Like I said, we're gonna have a party. It's gonna be a party for all, but BYOB. All right, thank y'all.
Okay. We have a board meeting every month. Our next board meeting will be December the 5th. Everybody is welcome to attend that. You're always welcome to attend that. And the next club meeting, not counting the Christmas party, will be January the 9th. And that will be here. Okay, any questions? Any further business? I declare the meeting adjourned, and we'll have the 50-50 celebrate wrap up.
Make him work.
Six 621-20 2043.
Last four numbers.
2043.